I will, before we start the debate, I'll just go through the changes that have been made in Westminster Hall. I need to remind honourable members that there have been some changes to normal practice in order to support the new call list system and to ensure that social distancing can be respected. Members should sanitise their microphones using the cleaning materials provided before they use them and dispose of them as they leave the room. Members are also asked to respect the one-way system around the room. Members should speak only from the horseshoe. The debate isn't oversubscribed, so there won't be anybody sitting at the back who can speak. Members are not expected to remain for the wind-ups. Members in the latter stages, if the call list, should use the seats in the public gallery, or should not need to move into the horseshoe. Honourable members, I would remind honourable members that there is less of an expectation that members stay for the next two speeches once they have spoken. This is to help manage attendance in the room. Members may wish to stay beyond their speech, but they should be aware that in doing so, if the debate is oversubscribed, they may prevent members in the seats in the public gallery from moving to seats in the horseshoe. Order. Martyn Day, to move the motion, please.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. I beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 307339, which relates to concerns about any trade deal reached between the UK Government and the United States of America not exempting our NHS, thereby leaving it vulnerable to privatisation and directly contradicting previous promises that this would not happen. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, Mr Stringer. The e-petition we are considering today was launched on the 11th of May and closed on Remembrance Day last week, attracting just under 112,000 signatures. The UK Government responded to this petition on the 23rd of June by saying, "The Government has been clear that protecting the UK's right to regulate in the public interest and protecting public services, including the NHS, is of the utmost importance." The petition also highlighted that if a deal quietly went through during the coronavirus crisis, it would be unethical, lack transparency, and if US finances were involved in our medical system, it would potentially create a direct health risk to us. This latter point refers to the fact that the US government statements have suggested it intends to negotiate for US pharmaceutical companies to charge higher prices for medicines sold to the NHS as part of any UK-US free trade agreement. The cost of drugs to the NHS is already growing much faster than inflation and is driving deficits across the service. Allowing big business and pharmaceutical companies to behave as they see fit will drive costs for new drugs well beyond the NHS's ability to afford them, which threatens our health, safety and national security. In its response to the petition, the Government went on to reiterate its overall objectives, which was stated in its UK-US Free Trade Agreement document, and said that, along with the NHS, the price the NHS pays for drugs and the services the NHS provides would not be on the table when negotiating trade deals. The response also said that no changes would be made to the UK's intellectual property regime that would lead to increased medicine costs for the NHS. However, the timing of the launch of this petition is significant because, as the Government response also pointed out, the negotiating objectives for a free trade agreement between the UK and the US were published on the 2nd of March, more than 2 months before the petition's launch. Therefore, it is a reasonable assumption that, as the petition was launched after the publication of the UK-US trade deal negotiating objectives, the petitioners either did not think the Government had been clear in its response, or else they were not convinced that the price the NHS pays for drugs or services the NHS provides would not be on the table when negotiating trade deals. Indeed, who can question the petitioners' doubts when we have seen the UK Government's repeated refusal to guarantee excluding the NHS and other public services from future trade deals? For example, Most recently, on the 28th of August, the Honourable Member for Warrington North tabled a written parliamentary question to the Trade Secretary and asked her if she will make it her policy to exclude the NHS from potential future trade deals. Unfortunately, although the question was direct, the answer the Honourable Member received did not give a direct commitment. Further, the UK Government's response said its negotiating positions have been made clear to all its trade partners, including the Trade Secretary in her written ministerial statement to Parliament on the 18th of May. But although the Secretary of State's statement on future trading relationship with the US mentioned negotiations many times, not once did it confirm that the NHS was not part of them. So I struggle to see what reassurance this statement gave. However, the Trade Secretary's next statement on the 30th of June about this matter, which was entitled Negotiations on the UK's Future Trading Relationships with the US Update, did state the Government remains clear on protecting the NHS. Those 8 words would have been welcomed across the House, of course, and we all wanted to take consolation from them, yet our hopes were again dashed less than 1 month later when Conservative MPs voted overwhelmingly against an amendment to the Trade Bill that would have enshrined in law the protection of our NHS and other vital public services that this petition is calling for. That is a significant inconsistency and does indeed contradict previous promises, which is a tenet of this petition. So I hope the Minister can throw some light on why only 2 Conservative MPs saw the perceived duplicity in saying one thing and then acting against it, not least because neither of the Secretary of State's subsequent statements have repeated this assurance. The people who have signed this petition just want that assurance. They want a cast iron guarantee, not words that can easily be rescinded, that the vital services provided by our NHS will be protected. Vital services that we have come to the fore in an unprecedented way throughout this terrible COVID-19 pandemic. Quite simply, the petitioners do not want our NHS to be weakened and undermined by private companies being able to trade unhindered on the back of it, which I think, and I'm sure others here agree, is a perfectly reasonable position, given what has already occurred regarding the Trade Bill. It is important to note at the early stages of this debate that because the Trade Bill was able to pass without the amendment that would have protected the NHS and publicly funded health and care services in other parts of the UK from any form of control from outside the UK, 1 independent MP joined 336 Conservative MPs to reject protecting the provision of a comprehensive publicly funded health service free at the point of delivery from being undermined or restricted by any international trade agreement. It is also worth noting the rejected amendment, among other things, would have recognised that an appropriate authority had the right to enact policies, legislation and regulation which protects and promotes health, public health, social care and public safety in health or care services, and would have excluded provision for any investor-state dispute settlement clause that provides or is related to the delivery of public services, health care, care or public health. I will discuss the relevance of ISDS clauses shortly, but before coming to that, I want to highlight another amendment that was proposed, which, before a trade agreement was approved, would have required that the UK Government to secure the approval of both Houses of Parliament and the devolved Parliaments of Scotland and Wales and the Northern Ireland Assembly. Notably, 323 Conservative MPs voted down this proposal. The reality of these 2 amendments being rejected, and has indeed been reported by the BBC Reality Check, is that Parliament does not have a statutory role in either scrutinising or voting on any future trade deals because the Government has the power to pass some aspects of trade deals without there even needing to be a vote in Parliament. Now, apart from the worrying lack of scrutiny that situation presents in protecting our NHS and other public services, I believe it to be fundamentally undemocratic. Indeed, the bottom line is that despite the UK Government's response to the petition also saying it would continue to ensure that decisions on how to run public services would include the devolved administrations, like Parliament, will not play a statutory role in the UK Government's international trade policy. This is also undemocratic and highlights the wider implication that a trade deal could undermine the constitutional powers that devolution delivered. It is plain for everyone to see that the NHS is a prime example of this because health is a devolved matter. Therefore, given the UK Government is in a position to influence devolved powers without a statutory requirement to consult with or even seek consent from devolved administrations in their response today, can the Minister also explain the Government's position that it is constitutionally inappropriate for devolved administrations to have a statutory role in a reserved area, while it is not deemed constitutionally inappropriate for the UK Government to legislate in areas of devolved competence? If the UK Government wants us to believe it will keep its promises that the NHS is not on the table in trade negotiations, then it should commit to legislation that will ensure it is taken off the table. I'm certain I am not alone in finding it hard to understand why an amendment which would have ensured market access to healthcare services was restricted was roundly rejected by all but 2 Conservative MPs. Having discussed how trade deals could negatively impact on health services, what possible reason would the Government have for not seizing the opportunity to legally commit to ensuring that trade agreements could not be concluded if they risked altering the way our NHS services are provided? That brings me to investor-state dispute settlements, which are a threat to public services, particularly when they are permitted speculatively or retrospectively. This was a red line when the EU negotiated TTIP with the US. The EU would never accept a trade deal with the US in which such principles would be compromised, because the trade agreements that include investor-state dispute settlement clauses have the potential to undermine the procurement process and regulations within the public procurement, especially within the NHS, if not restrained properly and fairly. Indeed, the creator of this petition, Joanne Barlow, saw investor-state dispute settlements as one of the major problems of a trade deal with the US, pointing out that this could include legal challenges by any US markets deprived of access to this market, or if their profits are threatened. Joanne explained that this would make it very difficult to return the NHS to a fully publicly owned and run institution. In addition, Ms Barlow noted that she could not find evidence of a specific clause exempting the NHS from American investment. Therefore, it would be of some comfort to the petitioners if the Minister can confirm today that there will be no investor-state dispute settlement clauses in any trade deal signed by the UK. To summarise, if this Government's insistence that the NHS is not on the table in a trade deal with the US is indeed the case, why did it not accept the amendments that were put forward and commit those pledges in law? The petitioners want that insistence in legislation to ensure that our NHS is not left vulnerable to privatisation or becomes a victim of broken promises that it will not be sold off to the highest bidder. No one needs reminding that we are still in the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has caused physical, mental and financial hardships to people across the UK. Therefore, given the lack of scrutiny and democracy that the Trade Bill has delivered, I urge the UK Government to respect the request of these petitioners in its negotiations with the US and not progress a trade deal that will risk our NHS in any way.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 307339 relating to trade deals and the NHS. Within the Chamber now, there are 5 people on the call list. There are 2 people who are not in the Chamber, so it's difficult for me to calculate a time limit. I intend to call the front bench spokespeople at 6:30. So if speakers can do the arithmetic themselves, and if we go... Did I say... Sorry, 5:30. I thank the Honourable Member for that. So we've got about 45 minutes for speeches from the back benches, and if people can keep an eye on the clock and their time of speeches, I won't have to impose a time limit. Mick Whitley.
Thank you very much, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And may I thank the honourable member for Linlithgow and Falkirk East, Martyn Day, for his hard work in securing this debate. I'm sure I will not be alone in having been inundated with messages from constituents in recent months urging me to do whatever I could to protect the NHS in any future trade deal with the United States. These messages were filled with admiration and gratitude for the nurses, doctors and support workers who have worked so tirelessly through the pandemic to save lives and stop the spread of this terrible disease. And I'm also sure we all echo these sentiments here today. But these messages were also full of fear. Fear that in just a few short months our health service could be laid to waste by predatory multinationals and the American healthcare industry. And I welcome the opportunity today to restate my opposition to the inclusion of any part of the NHS being treated as a bargaining chip in trade negotiations with the USA. I wish I could tell my constituencies that their fears are without foundation, but in Washington, politicians from across the board are pushing for the NHS to be on the negotiating table in free trade negotiations. As Chuck Grassley, the influential chair of the Senate Committee on Finance, has said, a trade deal ought to include almost anything. He added, I would hope that the National Health Service would be open to some competitive approach that would benefit our pharmaceutical companies. The ambition of the American healthcare lobby is clear. They want full market access to our National Health Service. They want an end to price control on drugs and pharmaceutical products so they can rinse the NHS of every penny. And they want to exploit investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms so they can sue the British government for making decisions that may well be in the best interest of the public, but fail to reward corporate private shareholders. The Prime Minister has said repeatedly that the NHS is not up for sale, but when the time came to put his money where his mouth is, he refused to support amendments to the trade bill that would have enshrined protections for the NHS into law. I'm not fear-mongering. I'm issuing a clear warning that without these legal protections, the NHS remains at risk of having for sale signs slapped on its services. As a member of the International Trade Select Committee, I've followed the ongoing trade negotiations closely, and I know that the UK is not negotiating from a position of strength. The government is playing a dangerous game of chicken. That's a moot point, that, isn't it? With the European Union. Our single largest trading partner, the looming prospect of a no-deal Brexit leaves us dangerously dependent on the securing a trade deal with the United States. And whilst I welcome the end of a Trump era in Washington, President-elect Biden has been clear that he prioritises a deal with the EU over the one with Britain. So I fear I share with my constituents is that as the EU transition period ends the scramble for the trade deals will step up, the pressure to put the NHS on the table will grow, and a deal at any price will be rushed through. We cannot allow that to happen. Our NHS must remain just that, ours. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Stringer, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Mr Stringer, I'm very unsurprised that my constituents have signed up to this petition in their droves because they've been contacting me regarding their concerns around the NHS and Brexit for many, many years. And now we have some concerning facts to go on. We know that following the Brexit vote, the government had 3 fundamental jobs to achieve on trade. Firstly, getting a deal to secure the half of our trade that depends on Europe. Second, negotiating rollover deals with the 40 countries and trade blocs with whom we currently trade freely, thanks to our membership of the EU. And third, negotiating entirely new trade deals with other parts of the world. After more than 4 years, and with just weeks until the end of the Brexit transition period, the government has failed dismally on all 3 counts. There's no deal in place with the EU. Rollover deals have still not been agreed with the likes of Canada, Turkey, Singapore and Mexico, and not a single genuinely new free trade deal has been agreed with any other country in the world. The Trade Secretary recently trumpeted her rollover trade deal with Japan, but failed to mention that 83% of the export growth resulting from the deal will go to Japanese exporters and only 17% to British firms. What will that do to our current trade deficit of $3 billion with Japan? With a potential trade deal with the US now on the back burner due to the election result, the government's trade strategy is in tatters. They said their objective after Brexit was that 80% of global trade would be covered by free trade deals, but as things stand right now, we will go into 2021 with little over 10% of our global trade agreed. Turning to the question of the National Health Service, many civil society organisations, particularly trade unions and health organisations, have long warned of the inclusion of public services, including health, in trade agreements. The concerns are fourfold. The first one, negative lists. These clauses require that all industries in trade agreements, unless there are specific carve-outs, can be included. It's not always easy to define what services count as health services. For instance, digital services may seem pretty irrelevant to health, Mr. Stringer, but NHS data management is increasingly digitised and apps for things like GP appointments are increasingly prevalent. Negative lists have a very broad scope covering both existing and future services and therefore make it harder for governments to regulate and provide health services, let alone reassuring our worried constituents. Number two, standstill clauses. After the trade deal's been signed, parties are not allowed to reduce the level of liberalisation beyond what it was at the point of signature. Ratchet clauses. Parties are not allowed to reverse certain measures brought in after the point of signature. And furthermore, failure to abide by these clauses can result in legal challenge from the trade partner, or if there's a separate ISDS clause, challenge from private investors, which the member who introduced the debate covered very well in his introductory statement, so I won't repeat them. The administration in the US has publicly stated that they wish to use a trade deal to challenge the purchasing model. This could be done through specific market access provisions or other clauses aimed at the pharmaceutical industry. This has the potential to greatly increase the cost of medicines, making some vital treatments unaffordable for the NHS. The benefit of our unitary model in the NHS is the way it's a cover-all. However, should there be an infiltration into that unified system, it does mean that it could be a real slam dunk for a hostile takeover almost. I use that term in inverted commas. Furthermore, in relation to health, one very good example on the digital trade is the cross-border data flows. Digital trade rules aim to limit the ability of governments to introduce localisation measures or stop data from leaving the country. This has potential privacy and security implications. For example, if sensitive NHS patient data are held by private firms outside the UK. And there are further points on technology transfer and the monetisation of patient data. The other great point, of course, about the unified NHS system is we have probably the best block of data to understand health in the world, because the NHS has information about every one of us because it is a unified system, and that therefore provides a wonderful trading tool if you see NHS data in that way. However, those of us who are concerned about the way data can be used, and that includes every member of this House, I'm sure, we do have to ask a lot of questions of the government. And, Mr. Stringer, that brings me to my final point, which is the lack of scrutiny on the principles behind the way that the trade operation is working at the moment. And secondly, around the specific trade deals and the specific way in which trade deals will come to the House of Commons. Now, why am I worried about that? I worry a lot about the fact that we don't bring people, groups, our constituents with us when we do things in the Commons. And we know that from certain times when you get to the end of a vote and people ask you what were you actually voting on, and you sort of explaining backwards. The thing about trade is we do need to bring people with us. The wonderful, who is now deceased, Senator John Lewis, who I met when I also sat on the Trade Select Committee, like my honourable friend, said he felt that TTIP failed because it failed to bring working people and trade unions with it. I think it failed for other reasons. It's quite complex. But I thought he made a very valuable contribution. And I think where the government is trying to cut corners now, because time is running out, and they think that they will be in government forever, which many of us hope they won't. But we have to see this in a less party political way, because trade is for a very long period, 10 to 15 years, and over a series of different governments. And we need to build in now, when we have an opportunity, the building blocks of scrutiny, so that, in the words of John Lewis, we can bring people with us and we can ensure that at the last hurdle these things are genuinely in the interests of our communities and in the interests of the people who we serve. Thank you, Mr. Stringer.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I thank my honourable member, the member for Hornsey and Wood Green, for her very reasoned argument, and in particular for making the point that trade should not be party political, because it's far greater than that. And I must admit, on that note, one of the things I have found the most frustrating about my time in Parliament so far is when nonsense attack lines are used, which whip up fear amongst our constituents and yet are not always based on a true reflection of the facts. And I recall very clearly a conversation I had with Joanne, who is now my constituency office manager, the first time we met. She'd asked to meet me before the election to discuss her concerns about a number of issues. And one were messages that she'd seen online suggesting that if the Conservatives won the election, that we would dismantle and sell off the NHS. Her and I had a great discussion that day, and I managed to reassure her to such an extent that she came to work for me. But I've lost count now of the number of times that I've given such assurances to constituents, either in person, by email, in writing, or over the phone, that the NHS is not for sale, and nor will it ever be for sale under a Conservative government. The Prime Minister, the Trade Secretary, and the Minister here today have made these assurances time and time again, in full, in public forums, on media, and more. Commitments that the NHS is not for sale, nor is the price of our medicine, nor are NHS health services open for foreign companies. And I think it is about time that largely our opponents quit with the attack lines, took off their red and yellow tinted spectacles, and started to work with us to help secure the future trade deals that will help make our country more prosperous. The NHS, as we all will agree, is one of the most valuable entities in our country. It's often called a jewel in our crown, but I think it's even more important than that. I think it embodies the very essence of our society. The spirit that no man will be left behind, that regardless of your health or wealth, you will receive treatment free at the point of use. And the people who work for our NHS are heroes. We've seen that demonstrated so clearly throughout this COVID pandemic. The doctors and nurses working for hours on end in full PPE, some even isolating away from their families to help keep them safe. And I know their sacrifice has certainly made me think twice about whinging about wearing a mask when going shopping for my groceries. But we mustn't forget the porters and the cleaners and the receptionists and the administrators and all the others who've worked so hard to keep the wheels of our great NHS turning in this difficult time. And my sincere thanks goes out to every single one of them. But for years now, there's been this weird obsession with Tory privatisation of the NHS. So if you'll indulge me, I want to take a little trip back in time. First to the 17th of April 1997, where Tony Blair claimed there were just 14 days to save the NHS. Then to the 21st of March 2009, where, according to the Morning Star, not a paper I usually cite over here, that there were 6 weeks to save the NHS. Now, I hear some of you say the reason the NHS needed saving was from the prospect of Tory government, so let's go a little further forward to the 4th of February 2012, under a Conservative government, where Ed Miliband said we have 3 months to save the NHS. That same month, the Mirror said there were just 12 days to save the NHS. Then in January 2015, the Mirror are back saying 4 months to save the NHS, but in 2017, 3 days to save the NHS. And yet here, in 2020, after 10 years of Conservative government, the NHS still stands, and it stands strong with record investment. In our manifesto, we pledged to build 40 new hospitals, and forgive me, we didn't actually stick to that commitment because we're actually delivering 48. Now, the NHS has existed for 72 years, almost 45 years whilst under a Conservative government. So I think it's time to end this narrative and stop the NHS from being used as a political football, because it is far too important for that. So now that I've started with what I consider some heavy myth-busting, I want to reassure the Minister that I do intend to actually talk a little bit about trade. I've long said that trade is the answer to the UK's future prosperity. In this globalised world where technology has made it not only possible, but it's made it easy to do business with our friends right around the world, global Britain must truly embrace the opportunity we've been granted to set our future trade policy as we leave the EU. As we know, our single biggest trading partner is the USA, which is also the nation with whom we have the biggest positive trade balance. In 2019, we exported £112 billion to the USA and imported £70 billion. By reaching a comprehensive free trade deal with the USA, we'll have even more trading opportunities. And that means more opportunities for businesses in all of our constituencies. So I think of Equus Leather in my constituency, where I took the Trade Secretary last year. The UK exports over 80% of its leather production, and our biggest export market for finished leather, the USA. I think also for our farmers, for those in Teesdale and Weardale, who work so hard to keep our country fed. The US trade deal is often sold by our opponents as though it will be harmful to farming, but on the contrary, I believe it presents a huge opportunity for our farmers. With market access to US beef being granted for the first time in over 20 years this year, the industry estimates that beef exports to the USA will be worth £66 million over the next 5 years for our farmers. And I think more broadly of the benefit of trade for County Durham and for the North East. County Durham exported almost £2 billion worth of goods worldwide last year. So the removal of further international trade barriers can help my county's exports to grow even further. And looking wider at the North East region as a whole, the Department for International Trade shows that analysis by the Department for International Trade shows that the North East is one of the regions of the UK that has the potential to benefit the most from a UK-US trade deal. And so, if you'll forgive me, a trade deal can even help us to level up the North East. My honourable friend, the member in charge of this petition, spoke about amendments to the trade bill. But he knows, as well as I do, that the trade bill was not about the US trade deal. It wasn't about future trade deals. It was about trade continuity of existing trade agreements. And the amendment would not have had an impact on any future US trade deal. And furthermore, I wish the honourable members opposite would talk about the work the department is doing to allow scrutiny of future trade deals, such as the regular MP engagement events that I know I've been invited to and have attended, and I hope that many of you will take up the opportunity to do as well. And furthermore, any future trade deals will need parliamentary approval. And I, for one, would certainly not approve a trade deal that included our NHS, and I think it's safe to say nor would my Conservative colleagues. So I hope that what I've said today acts as some reassurance to those who signed the petition. But to reiterate this point one final time, because I cannot say it enough, the NHS is not and will not be for sale under a Conservative government. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Claudia Webb.
Thank you, Mr Stringer, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would like to begin by congratulating the Honourable Member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk for securing this important debate. This government has repeatedly asked, and even today the Honourable Member for Bishop Auckland asked again today for the public to blindly trust, despite mounting evidence to the contrary, their promise that the NHS is not for sale in any future trade deals with the US. They've repeatedly been provided opportunities to put these fears to bed, with amendments tabled to the government's post-Brexit trade deal explicitly stating that the NHS would be excluded from any future trade agreements. This proposal was supported by more than 400 doctors and health professionals, yet rather than deliver on their promise, not a single Conservative MP voted for the amendment, which was defeated by 89 votes. The government claimed farcically that they voted against the amendment because it legitimises the concept of NHS privatisation, which, in the realms of hypotheticals and metaphysics, they claim to oppose. Yet when faced with a concrete opportunity to enshrine in law the safety of our most treasured public institution, the government sat on their hands. Now our NHS will be at the mercy of US negotiators who are heavily influenced by the multi-billion dollar private healthcare interest in carving up our health service for corporate gain. This clearly demonstrates the government's commitment to ensure that the NHS is on the table during trade negotiations. Yet there is an even clearer reason why we cannot trust them or the words of the Honourable Member for Bishop Auckland. And when they say that the NHS is not for sale. And that is because they have already been selling it off piece by piece for the best part of a decade. Since the disastrous 2012 Health and Social Care Act, NHS outsourcing and privatisation has been incentivised. Clinical commissioning groups are under pressure to outsource, and in 2015, private firms won 40% of all contracts. In the last 5 years alone, private companies were handed 15 billion worth of NHS contracts. 18% of healthcare bids now go to private providers. It is true that the NHS logo remains, and in some cases is even co-opted by private providers, such as with the disastrous so-called NHS Test and Trace, which is predominantly run by Serco. Yet the direction of travel under this government has been towards a fragmented, underfunded and increasingly privatised healthcare system. The dangers of sliding towards a US-style private insurance healthcare system cannot be overstated. Research by the Commonwealth Fund in 2018 found that nearly half of working-age Americans, a staggering 87 million people, were either underinsured or had no coverage at all. Rather than spending money on doctors, nurses, mental health professionals, dentists and other professionals who will provide services to people and improve their lives, the US wastes hundreds of billions of dollars a year on profiteering. Huge executive compensation packages and outrageous administrative costs. Despite widespread myths regarding the efficiency of the free market, the US state spends nearly double what we spend on healthcare for generally worse healthcare results. Yet this is the system that recently appointed advisors to the Secretary of State for International Trade believe is superior to our own. It is common sense that in services essential to human life, profiteering and corporate greed should be off limits. This is reflected in public polling, which shows that 84% of Britons believe the NHS should be in public ownership. The NHS is a gleaming beacon of human achievement, of embodiment of socialist universal principles in which everyone, no matter their position in society, benefits equally. It is therefore up to all of us who value healthcare as a human right, to protect our most treasured public institution. And it is incumbent on this government to make their rhetoric a reality and legislate to ensure that our NHS is truly off the table and is never put up for sale. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I fully support the petition relating to trade deals and the NHS that we're debating here today, which is signed by more than 110,000 people, including a number of my constituents. And I too pay tribute and thank our superb NHS staff and their public service. I also want to thank Unite, Unison, We Own It, Keep Our NHS Public, Global Justice Now and other organisations for their campaigning to protect our NHS. Our NHS was founded on a set of collectivist principles that bind our communities together. These principles represent a commitment to comprehensive, free healthcare service that delivers excellent and professional care to all who need it in the UK, as much as an obligation to providing the best value for taxpayers' money and ensuring that services remain accountable to the public. However, this all seems to be at odds with the government's current trade strategy, one which does not omit the NHS from future trade deals and exposes the NHS to competition and the market. This runs the risk of damaging standards of care and diluting the transparency of decision-making. The threat posed to our healthcare system is clear for all of us to see. US officials have repeatedly stated that they regard the NHS as being on the table and specifically want to ensure that the big US healthcare and drug companies can compete fairly to provide medical services, sell drugs and access NHS patient data. But we also shouldn't just be looking across the pond. The Secretary of State for International Trade has very close relationships with right-wing think tanks that want to see the NHS opened up to private competition, notably Daniel Hannan. In 2018, Hannan and his Initiative for Free Trade joined forces with the US Cato Institute and 10 other UK and US right-wing think tanks to promote their ideal US-UK free trade agreement that called for the opening up of all services in both countries to competition. Its co-editor, Daniel Ikenson, said about the report, "Healthcare is a service and we call for opening services to competition. I know some people are worried about what happens to the NHS.
We think competition is a good thing and it would lead to better quality healthcare. So when the Minister of State comes to respond, can he explain why the other co-editor of that report, Daniel Hannan, is now a lead advisor on his department's Board of Trade? So is it any wonder we don't feel inclined to trust the Secretary of State when she says publicly the NHS is not for sale, but then in private surrounds herself with advisors from the IEA, the Cato Institute and other right-wing think tanks who argue the exact opposite? So we must remember that even if the US healthcare industry is prevented from directly competing with the NHS for government-funded services, the government's trade agreement may open access to NHS procurement contracts for buying medicines, delivering medical treatments and providing patient accommodation. US healthcare will then have the power to drive up the price charged for these services in future contract rounds. It's not accurate for the government to state that the NHS is not for sale when we've already seen the government privatise our COVID-19 response, handing out huge contracts to companies like Deloitte, Serco, KPMG, who have put profits and cost-cutting before care and wasted millions of pounds of taxpayers' money. The UK-US trade situation is likely to change as the incoming US administration takes office in January, but we must also monitor discussions regarding the UK joining the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, which demands a very open approach to competition in services, potentially including healthcare. So I hope the Minister of State will address that point and say specifically whether membership of the CPTPP will oblige the UK to accept a list it or lose it approach to private competition in the public sector. If so, will the government guarantee to negotiate a carve-out for the UK from those provisions when it comes to our NHS and other essential public services? I agree with campaigners that the gradual marketisation and outsourcing of NHS care is what we must oppose at all costs. Our ethical, communitarian-focused NHS is not compatible with private greed. The Labour Party's stance on this issue is simple and clear. The best way to remove the threat to the NHS from whatever direction it comes, now or in the future, is to legislate in the trade bill that the NHS should be outside the scope of any future trade agreements. But it speaks volumes that the government is refusing to do so. The NHS is more than a logo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Stringer, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would like to firstly say thank you to those who signed the petition and organised the petition. It's great to be able to stand here and clarify and reassure them of the concerns that they may have had about the privatisation of the NHS or any act of that under the trade deal. Because the reality is, this trade bill, first of all, has nothing to do with that. It's an extension of the existing agreement, which doesn't cover the US activities. But more importantly, the reality is this government has shown none, nor has done no activities to privatise the NHS. And in fact, the fear-mongering that happens around this, as I wrote in an article earlier this year, actually causes anxiety for many. It causes fear and concern for the very people who need to be reassured about the fact that they can always access their NHS services at the point of need for free. Now, the reality is the nuanced debate is stifled, ironically, by an opposition that, whilst I do not wish to make point scoring on this, because I really don't like political point scoring, but I do want to make a point that it's the opposition that brought in PFI. The Labour opposition that brought in privatised Hitchinbrook Hospital. It was the opposition that introduced prescription charges for spectacles and dentistry. Yet this government has undone much of the work. We bought back Hitchinbrook. We've invested millions, if not billions, in the NHS over the past year. And in fact, as a member of the Health and Social Care Select Committee, I've seen firsthand the good, but also the challenges the NHS face. And when we look at those, one of the biggest problems that I have seen over the past few decades, and in particular the past few years, as this rhetoric around fear-mongering, around privatisation of the NHS has built and built, is that, yes, it helps you put leaflets through doors. Yes, it helps one make political points. Yes, it helps create coverage and news headlines. But what it also does is make the people at the very heart of the NHS who need that support worry about their futures. Now, I volunteer regularly. I'll gladly give way.
I'm interested you make that. I'm interested the honourable member makes that point around fear-mongering. I was wondering if he, like me, has had many NHS employees contact him with regards to their concerns around privatisation of the NHS. Not that they're fearful for their jobs, but actually they're fearful for the future of the NHS.
I thank the honourable member for her comment, because yes, they have. And where have they got that from? They've got it from leaflets, they've got it from newspapers. In fact, the very point I was about to make was that in my volunteering at Watford General Hospital, I've spoken to staff who were anxious about what does the future look like. I was anxious to speak to them because I want to understand what their actual fears are. And often the fears are based on rhetoric and not on facts. They're based on what might be in the future, which actually is based on the past of previous governments, but not this government. And in fact, the anxiety goes deeper than that. Quite recently, whilst volunteering at the hospital, I was holding an iPad for a gentleman who'd had a stroke. And it was quite a moving moment because I was explaining to him that he had time to speak to his daughter. And whilst I sat there on my knees, holding the iPad for the gentleman, he reached his hand over to hold my wrist and said just a few minutes longer so that he could speak to his daughter for a little bit longer. And in that moment, I realised the fear and vulnerability those have who are in the NHS, who are in those hospital beds, the patients, the staff and their families, who worry about what actual support will they get. And in that moment, I realised also that this is not just about medicine. It's not just about pharmaceuticals. It's not just about trade deals. It's about real people who are suffering and need support. But what they also need is the reassurance and continued reassurance that we are not privatising the NHS, even though this government has never, not once, ever opted to do that, and neither will it. Now, the truth is, within that, we also heard an excellent contribution earlier about data. This is something I'm passionate about. I think digital and data are the future of the NHS. The ability to, in the future, cure cancer or cure diseases by looking at data in a much more fair way, by making sure that people feel comfortable to share their data online and with the NHS and with organisations to help them solve the biggest issues in the world. Yet why wouldn't they do that? Because there's fear around where that data would go. Yet every single day people share where they are, what they eat, who their friends are with Facebook, with Google, with all of these big corporate organisations with no second thought. Yet because of this rhetoric, and in part because of this rhetoric, I won't blame it fully to be fair, but in part because of this rhetoric, they are fearful of giving data and important information to government, to the NHS, to help them solve those big issues. Now, what we've seen with the Test and Track app is actually people, when you create the safety and the security and you reassure them, they will do that. And it's saved how many countless lives by people being able to use that app to be able to look and see other people who need support or need to be isolated. But that's about the security and safety that people feel in themselves. But this rhetoric, this constant rhetoric, this drumbeat, just to get leaflets through doors so that we can make this constant argument around privatisation is just fear-mongering at its worst. And in fact, it's scaring those who are most vulnerable, as I say. Now, as a member of the Health and Social Care Select Committee, I can tell you, I hear the good and the concerning from the NHS and from social care. I am not saying it's this amazing organisation and I'm not even saying the government is perfect in every possible way. But what I would say is that there is scrutiny there. There are opportunities to delve into that. But also there's a much, much needed way to have a calm and nuanced debate around what does that look like in the future. What does the NHS need in the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years? And not constantly looking at the next election cycle. We need to take this rhetoric out so that we can have very calm and consistent and very thoughtful debate around what that will look like. And I'm pleased to see colleagues here from the committee who we work very closely together and very well together, I hope that they would agree, on the committee to be able to have debate and discussion around this. But when we can't do that in the public realm, I think that stifles us and our ability to be able to continually prove the NHS and improve it. Now, the trade bill is about the existing trade. I'm not going to go into details on that because I'm sure my right honourable friend will go into that in much more detail. But what I would say is that please, let's move forward. Those who are watching this debate and listening to it who signed the petition, please look at the facts and please be reassured by the facts. of what's happened through this government and what we're saying about the NHS not being on the table. And I really urge all colleagues, let's come together and let's have a calm debate about what this will look like in the future. Because if we don't do that, the very people who need the most support are the ones who are the most anxious and most fearful, and they're the ones who will be harmed the worst simply by words. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. First of all, can I congratulate the honourable gentleman for Lithnagow and East Falkirk. It's nice to see him. I haven't seen him for ages in the House here, so it's good to see him back as well. And for all members who have made contributions. I'm my party's health spokesperson, so this is an issue that's very close to my heart. It's part of my portfolio, but it's more than that. As the honourable gentleman says, our NHS means more than just an organisation. It means the care that it gives, and that's what I want to refer to, and I want to do that if I can in the few moments that I have left. There have been real valid concerns about our trade deals, and I understand that, and that's why we're having this debate. And the vote on this Brexit presented this place with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make trade deals to enhance the wealth of this country, and I believe that can happen. Others might have a different opinion, but we'll wait and see, and to make our own decisions. Also says, as it says in the Scripture, to whom much is given, much is expected, and there are high standards for all of us in this place and further afield. What unites us in this debate is our love of the NHS. It's united us together to protect it. It's the unions, it's the patients, it's government, it's elected representatives, and it's our constituents. All of those collectively together have made it very clear what we need to do and why we're here today to debate this. The road to attainment is difficult and not without setbacks. However, what my constituents have made abundantly clear is that our NHS is a treasure and is not to be touched other than to enhance and improve in-house. I've had, Mr Stringer, in the last few weeks had the opportunity to know first-hand in a very, very personal matter in relation to our own family what the NHS can do. And when you're touched by that, Mr Stringer, you realise just how much and how important the NHS is to your family in particular. I can also say that that many of us, and we'll have family members, Mr Stringer, who will be alive today because of what the NHS have done, what their staff have done, the contribution it has made to each and every one of our lives in this chamber and outside of it. I think of my father, who he's dead and gone now, but he's dead 6 years. But when he was living, Mr Stringer, he had 3 operations for cancer, and I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that it was the skill of the surgeon's knife, it was the love of the nurses, and it was the prayers of God's people that saved him on 3 occasions. So the NHS, for all of us, Mr Stringer, is a really, really important part of all of our lives, and what we do personally and how it has affected us. So I want to put that on record. I'm sure I'm not the only MP to be inundated with the circular emails regarding the trade deals and the NHS. I received these, but also received quite a few personal ones that reminded me of how truly exceptional our NHS is. I just want to quote one letter from. I get lots and lots of letters regularly, and it's good, Mr Stringer, to get letters from people, but people usually contact you to tell you how bad things are and to give off, and that's the nature of our job. But people also contact you to say thank you for what you do. And this lady wrote to me, and I just want to quote her. I seem to be writing to you a lot recently, but our NHS are very important to me personally. This is a lady. When I was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia stage 4, what seemed to compound the problem was that when I had to have the chemo treatment, I had to be admitted due to the problems I have with my back problems. The care I received was actually, I would not say a bad word against any doctor or nurse that gave me the care during my long stay in hospital. Jim, I'm depending on you and every member in this House and all of your colleagues to make sure that the NHS is protected in law and safe from any trade deals. This government says one thing, and not being critical now, Mr Singh, I want to make it quite clear, okay, and that they'll protect the NHS, but we need to see it in law. So today's debate is really important because there's a chance to see that in law. And my constituents want to know that the NHS is protected in law in this trade bill. The message is clear. We have something that's worth protecting. I'm not in any way dismissing the American medical staff. My parliamentary aide's daughter was taken into hospital with pneumonia while she was on a holiday in Florida. An honourable lady for Leicester East referred to some of the what happens in America. I just quote this here again because it gives the comparison between our NHS and what it means in America. She said that the care she got in that American hospital was second to none, but the lasting conversation that she remembered was when she was waiting for the consultant to come and see her child after the X-ray was brought to the room. She heard the patient next door being repeatedly told that unless she remembered her insurance details, she couldn't be treated. Boy, aren't we really lucky to have an NHS, Mr. Stringer? Aren't we really lucky to have an NHS that looks after our people and saves our people, rather than one that you pay into? Just struck with her and made her thankful for NHS, because no matter where you are from, what your job is or what your prognosis is, treatment will never, never be withheld. And that's what our NHS means. I conclude with this, Mr. Stringer. This is something we need to treasure, the expertise of the staff, the way in which we treat them. These are all things that need to be protected. And I, along with all our MPs, and I hopefully collectively in this House today, universally and across all the political parties, that we can say that this trade deal will never impact upon the NHS. The Minister has said that. Government has said that. And I want them to say that in this chamber in this debate today. Thank you.
Neil Humphey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stringer, and it is my pleasure to serve under your chairship. I would like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk, for securing this important debate. The genesis of and support for this petition is a reflection of the values and esteem with which each nation's NHS is held. But it's also a reflection of the public's mistrust of this Prime Minister and his government to honour their word, and concern over the risk to the NHS from corporate avarice should it be on the table in any US trade deal. Before the scale of cronyism, incompetence and allegations of corruption began to dog this government, petitioners recognised that deals conducted by this government during the coronavirus crisis could be unethical and lack transparency. And whilst we are set to see an end to Trumpian politics in the USA at least, the concern still stands that involving the US financially in our health system could pose a serious health risk to us and to our NHS. Save our outstanding landscapes and convivial culture, there is little more precious in Scotland and to the people in Scotland than their NHS. An NHS in Scotland which is unencumbered by a false internal market and minimal involvement of the private sector. The public service ethos is rewarded with a satisfaction level of 78%, an impressive 36% higher than for the NHS across the UK. Perhaps I am worrying unnecessarily, perhaps the honourable member from Watford is right. But, Mr Stringer, as a government, ministers are on record of giving repeated assurances that there will be no requirement to increase private provision, no ramping up of drug costs, and that health data is safe. Well, that begs the question, if the government are so confident and are assuring us not to worry, then why the hesitancy on explicit protection of primary legislation? Sadly, in Scotland, we have a track record on which to judge this government, and an even sadder track record in Scotland on which to judge promises and vows from any Westminster government, whatever the stripes. I will digress, if I may, slightly, but this weekend I watched the first ever episode of Taggart, before it was called Taggart, in fact. Set in Glasgow in 1983, this was at the height of the North Sea oil boom, yet the deprivation on show was truly shameful. And this was no fluke of filming location. Like many, I walked through those desolate scenes of economic devastation. The loads of money Thatcherism owed less to the pooling and sharing of resources and more to the pooling of that oil wealth out of Scotland than any dubious acclaim for her ideology. Greed is never attractive. Of course, the true value of that wealth was deliberately concealed from the Scottish people, as evidenced by the Macron report, and whilst the wealth was removed, so too were jobs and hope. I also had my usual dose of Mar on Sunday morning, and up popped Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath predecessor thrice back. It was a really odd experience because I thought they were showing a clip from 2014, but actually it was new footage and it was almost verbatim, the same story, the same script. endorsed by all of the Westminster parties in 2014 to disingenuously secure a Pyrrhic victory that only served to drive a surge.
The honourable gentleman is straying quite a distance from trade and the NHS. If you can focus back on it.
It's the next line.
I'm grateful to the honourable member. Neil Hanby.
As I was saying, Mr Stringer, that only served to drive a surge of support for the SNP and Scottish independence. Before I get accused of straying too far, what relevance is this to trade deals in the NHS? Well, one simple but absolutely essential word, when it's the word of another which your future depends upon, and that is trust. Why should my constituents trust this government? Not just for historical wrongs, but for their conduct in the here and now. My honourable friend has set out serious questions and concerns which deserve full and transparent answers. Where the coronavirus stalks the halls of power, where the government ministers puff out their chest to defend their intention to break international law, where the Prime Minister refuses to answer questions in the chamber but casually insults, where the promises of Devo Max have led Scotland to a Devo-destroying UK internal market bill, where the child poverty this government has created is dismissed and hunger ignored, where a pay rise for carers and nurses is unaffordable, but an MP's pay rise will do quite nicely, thank you. Why should the people who dedicate their lives to the NHS take this government's word for anything? Their belief in altruism and shared endeavour is in peril. They understand the implications of negative lists, standstill clauses, ratchet clauses, and the ultimate con, the investor-state dispute settlement process, all of which have the potential to eviscerate the NHS. In closing, the petitioners want to protect the NHS through primary legislation because we all know that to neoliberals, health is never the priority, profit is. And there is no place in the Scottish NHS for profiteering. This government must commit to legislate and protect each NHS. Only then will any trust return.
Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Stringer, and can I congratulate the member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk for introducing the petition to us. And thank my honourable friends for their excellent speeches, the members for Birkenhead, Hornsey and Wood Green and Luton South. The petition we have in front of us is to omit the NHS from future US trade deals. And the concerns raised by the petitioners would be relatively easily dealt with were the Minister, in a few minutes' time, to commit not just to what he said before about the NHS being off the table, but in the trade bill, in the Lords, when it comes back in the next few days or weeks, whenever that is, that they put those protections on the face of the bill. The amendments that were turned down here are passed in the Lords and retained when it comes back here. That's the simplest way of dealing with what the petitioners are asking for, because they are concerned about the American healthcare system, about the size and scale of the industry in America, the fact that it is 1 in 8 jobs in the United States, the importance it has to the United States economy, but the importance it has to shareholders. And those US healthcare companies have a responsibility to maximise shareholder wealth, as do all companies, of course. So they are only doing what they must do. And that means looking further afield. It means looking with great interest at the National Health Service. And we know that they do it, or did it, or continue to do it for the next few days anyway, with the support of the Trump administration. And yes, it's welcome news that we have President-elect Biden hopefully to take over court cases notwithstanding on the 20th of January. But this petition, when it was signed, was with President Trump in office, and the petitioners had no way of knowing whether that would change. They are concerned about the US objectives that were published in March. They are concerned about the market access being requested by US negotiators for pharmaceuticals. They are concerned about that market access and what it means in practice. I'm not going to give way to somebody who's not been here for the...
Just order. Can I
don't know. Sorry. Yeah.
Can I just explain something? It might be useful for future debates. If honourable members are not on the call list, they cannot intervene in Westminster Hall debates under the present rules. Bill Esterson.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. They are concerned at that market access to the National Health Service that is outlined in the trade agreement objectives of the United States, because it is a long-stated objective of American pharmaceutical companies to take away the control, the influence that the NHS has on drug pricing, not just in this country, but across the continent of Europe as well. And that is a very real concern. They are concerned about the access to data, and Alan Winters from the Trade Policy Observatory has set out in real detail what those concerns are. A £10 billion potential cost to the National Health Service of having to get access to our own patient records, royalties being paid to Silicon Valley, as he terms it, and legal action against the National Health Service to boot, along with dilution of data privacy rules if the American trade negotiation objectives are put into law. So those are the reasons that so many people signed the petition and had so much concern. And the concern doesn't just apply to US healthcare companies. It applies to UK right-wing think tanks and their link-ups with their American counterparts and allies. And we've heard the name Daniel Hannan this afternoon already. He is a co-author of the ideal US-UK trade agreement document that was launched in London. And it was launched in London alongside the Cato Institute on the same day as the International Trade Secretary was speaking to the Cato Institute's Washington office. I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Stringer. I suspect I'm not the only one in the room who feels that way. And I do have this concern, as do those petitioners, that it isn't just about US healthcare companies, it is about UK right-wing think tanks and their representatives that causes us great concern. And let's remember what Mr. Hannan and his friends have had to say. When the Cato Institute launched the report, the co-editor who spoke at the launch, Daniel Ikenson, said, "Healthcare is a service, and we call for opening services to competition." And he also said, "But this is a free trade agreement. The purpose of liberalising trade is to expose incumbent business to competition, including healthcare." It is there in the words of the think tanks that the Secretary of State works with and has advising her on the Board of Trade, Mr. Hannan being an appointee of the Secretary of State to the Board of Trade just a few months ago. And I'll move now to the so-called Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP. In its service chapter, because this isn't just about the United States, this isn't just about the trade agreement that might come from the United States, and we don't know what status or stage that is now at, either under the potential for a fast-track one under the existing regime or what might then happen later on. But we do know, because the Secretary of State has made her views very clear, that her desire is to sign an agreement with 11 countries on the Pacific Rim, the CPTPP. And in the service chapter of that agreement, it includes negative lists, ratchet clauses, and ISDS. And it includes health. There is no opt-out or carve-out for health in that agreement. And as the Nuffield Trust tells us, having negative list systems, having ratchet clauses, having ISDS, locks out the potential for governments to bring public services back in-house once they have been privatised. Indeed, it drives further privatisation and prevents a reduction in it. It takes away control rather than giving back control, as we might term things. I'll give way.
Neil Humvey.
Does the honourable gentleman share my concern that the term for sale is used as a cover, which obviously the NHS is not going to be put up for sale like a house, but that parts of the services that are provided will be contracted out to a range of different private providers, and they will suck up the funding in profits rather than ensure those investments go to where they're properly supposed to go in the resourcing of healthcare services.
Lesterson.
Yes, that's right, and that is the problem in America, isn't it, where we have so much money that goes to executive wealth or to or is wasted on administration and costs instead of going into patient care and medical activity. He's quite right to make that point. I just want to quote what the BMA says about CPTPP. They tell us that the UK would be unable to negotiate any additional carve-outs for healthcare services. They tell us we do not believe that the NHS is adequately protected under CPTPP, because whereas New Zealand has a carve-out on health as members of the PPP, get there in the end, on ISDS, that won't be available to us because it is an existing agreement, and the member countries have made clear publicly that they will not give carve-outs to new joiners. Now, the Minister, as it happens, in answer on the 8th of October to a question in the Chamber, was asked about this. He told us he had met the lead negotiators for the 11 countries and had enjoyed discussions with us. So perhaps he can provide some reassurance that what I'm saying from the BMA perhaps is not the full story, and that he asked the question and had an answer about whether carve-outs on health would be possible, given that it's an existing agreement. So when he answers, perhaps he can tell us whether he asked that question and what the answer was. The government's answer to the points put by my honourable friends and by me are that the NHS is not on the table. Well, if so, why is it that the US negotiating objectives said that it was? They say that this is not, that it's not in existing agreements. Well, that's true. It's not in the agreements that we are currently signed up to. But this petition is about future trade agreements. And the CPTPP for us would be a future trade agreements. And those right-wing think tanks with links to the Secretary of State and to government also want this to happen. So a lot of reassurance is needed by those petitioners and by very many more people besides. And it requires far greater scrutiny as well. I heard one honourable member describing the process for the scrutiny of trade agreements, which we debated in the trade bill. In fact, the Minister and I have debated these matters more than once, in more than one trade bill. And no doubt we will do so again. But the reality is that the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act 2010, which provides the framework that we operate under at the moment, gives no guarantee of a debate or vote on trade agreements. It requires the laying in Parliament of a trade agreement negotiated for 21 days. What it doesn't do is provide a mechanism, a guaranteed mechanism for debate, because that relies on the opposition being granted an opposition day debate by the government. The government controls the agenda in Parliament. And members will have noticed that for the last few weeks we haven't had an opposition day debate. We went for a long period in the last Parliament without any opposition day debates. So there is no guarantee of that process being implemented. And as to whether a debate at the end, if we're allowed one, is adequate scrutiny, that is entirely another matter altogether. And I come back to what I started with. If the government is serious about exempting the National Health Service from future trade agreements, put it in the trade bill. Support it in the House of Lords and support it when it comes back here, because that is the opportunity to do just that. So we know that the CPTPP is a government priority in the absence of the United States agreement. So will the Minister tell us when he stands up, is the government going to refuse to sign it without carve-outs? And as to the lack of scrutiny, Mr. Stringer, it is in the government's hands. There's a lack of scrutiny. So far there's been a refusal to put the exemption in the trade bill. We have key advisers of the government committed to privatisation. We have all the concerns about the CPTPP. These all suggest that those who signed the petition were absolutely right to do so, to have concerns, not just about the United States, but about CPTPP as well. They are right to be concerned about the future of the National Health Service in trade deals.
Minister, and just before you start your speech, can I ask you to save 2 or 3 minutes at the end for a wind-up from the proposer? Minister.
Thank you, Mr Stringer, and can I say it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank the member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk for opening this debate, as well as the more than 110,000 members of the public who raised this topic, one that is that I know hugely important to us all. There have been a lot of rumours, confusion and misstatements about this subject, so I'm more than happy to set the record straight today. The NHS is this nation's most popular institution, but it's far more than an institution. For more than 70 years, it has been there for all of us, from cradle to grave. It is an institution that played a very personal role in all of our lives, some of the most joyful and indeed the saddest moments. In the midst of this terrible pandemic, the importance of the NHS has become even more acute. And I should like to pay tribute to the extraordinary staff up and down our country who are battling the coronavirus outbreak so valiantly and selflessly, and to extend my deepest sympathy to those who have lost loved ones during the pandemic, including, I might add, my father, who died of coronavirus on the 13th of April of this year. But it is thanks to the bravery and expertise of our world-class doctors, nurses and hospital staff in containing the virus that we are able to meet here in this House today, for which I am hugely grateful. So let me be very clear. Our NHS will not be for sale in any future trade deal with the US, or indeed any trade deal at all. For the sake of parliamentary time, I could be very brief. The word no is one of the shortest in the language. No, not at all, and never. Protecting the NHS is a fundamental principle of our trade policy. The NHS, its services and the prices it pays for drugs are not for sale, and we will not agree measures which undermine the government's ability to deliver on these commitments. The NHS is not and will never be for sale to the private sector, whether overseas or domestic, and no trade deals will ever be able to alter these fundamental facts. The government has been consistently clear about its commitment to the guiding principles of the NHS, that it is universal and free at the point of need. As set out in the October 2017 White Paper, preparing for our future trade policy, the government will continue to ensure that decisions on how to run public services are made by UK governments, including the devolved administrations, and not, and has never been the case, by our trade partners. No trade agreement has ever affected our ability to keep our public services public. nor has one ever forced us to change the way we run them. And that is not going to change now. Safeguarding the UK's right to regulate in the public interest and to protect public services, including the NHS, is of the utmost importance. And that was and is and will remain the government's position. Now, turning to the points raised in the debate, the member for Linlithgow mentioned 2 or 3 points. First of all, he is right that the NHS is devolved in Scotland. Trade policy is reserved. We recognise the fact that trade policy impacts on areas of devolved competence, and that is why I work very closely with the Scottish Government in making sure that we have a common understanding and we work well together in those spaces. He mentioned an ISDS threat to public services. The UK is already subject to ISDS in more than 90 agreements. We have never, ever had a successful claim brought against the United Kingdom through an ISDS court. No ISDS court can overturn Parliament or force any change to the law. The trade bill has been stated before, but the trade bill, Mr Stringer, refers to the continuity of existing trade agreements. It does not refer to future free trade agreements. The EU does not have a trade agreement with the United States. Therefore, the United States is not within scope of the trade bill. I heard some brilliant speeches from my own side, the members for Bishop Auckland and Watford. My honourable friend, the member for Bishop Auckland, talked about the Labour Party and others whipping up fear. And that is absolutely correct. I've seen it in my constituency. The last 4 general elections, Mr Stringer, the Labour Party has run the fact that Charing Cross Hospital will either be demolished or closed. The last 4 general elections, I can report that Charing Cross Hospital is doing very well and is actually, the Secretary of State for Health announced a floor-by-floor refurbishment of the hospital just a couple of months ago. So she is absolutely right. There's been record investment under this Conservative government. And she also right that trade is the answer to our long-term prosperity. We had a passionate, knowledgeable and superb speech from my honourable friend, the member for Watford, about his local NHS, which I know quite well. The excellent Watford General Hospital has served my family for 2 generations, which comes from Amersham in Buckinghamshire. It's a brilliant, brilliant hospital, and he spoke with great passion about it. We heard some of the fears coming from the members for Birkenhead, Hornsey and Wood Green, Leicester East, Luton South. And just to deal with one point, the specific question from the member for Luton South about the CPTPP. Look, the negative or positive list, in each, one is allowed to expressly exclude public services that one does not want to be subject to a trade agreement. So the UK could and would negotiate specific exemptions in CPTPP on the NHS and other public services which we deem to be important to us. Of course, that lies within our rights. The member for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, in his summary, well, Mr Stringer, the NHS in Scotland, as we know, is devolved. But he quickly moved on to talking about separation. I mean, I think it was almost in record time, even by the standards of the Scottish National Party, to show that separation is more important to him than either the NHS or trade. And turning to I was about to say my old friend, he's certainly not my honourable friend, but he is a friend, the member for Sefton Central. I wasn't quite sure if he noticed the change in Labour's approach on trade policy as they moved across North London from the member for Brent North to now the member for Islington South. I'm not sure if he picked up on the subtle change in that policy. A few things, though. On drug prices, the UK has a very robust regime of intellectual property on pharmaceuticals or medical devices. We will not make changes to our IP regime that would lead to increased medical prices for the NHS. Our negotiation objectives, a lot of people are referring to the US's negotiation objectives. Nobody has yet referred to our negotiation objectives that were published on the 2nd of March. And there we stated the NHS would not be on the table, the prices paid for drugs would not be on the table, the services that the NHS provides would not be on the table. And he talked about, on a set of dates, like an incredible story about, I think, involving the Cato Institute, an incredible series of dates. He said he doesn't believe in coincidences, but maybe he might believe in conspiracy theories. Mr Stringer, as an independent global Britain, this government is working hard to build our trade policy. As set out in this government manifesto, and again in our negotiation objectives, the NHS will not be on the table. Decisions on how to run the NHS and all public services are made by UK governments, including the devolved administrations, and no trade deal will change this. And the UK's high standards of data protection will be maintained. The government is clear that health and care data should only ever be used, I'm going to come to a conclusion, only ever be used or shared where used lawfully, treated with respect, held securely, and where the right safeguards are in place. But also, Mr Stringer, I'm going to leave a few minutes for the response. Just on Parliament, absolutely clear that any trade deal could not be ratified without scrutiny by Parliament. There is also a separation between international and domestic law, so any changes made to the NHS through a trade deal would need domestic implementing legislation, just as much as if those changes were to be made without a trade deal. There is no way to sidestep Parliament. The government will never agree to a trade deal with the US or any other country that risks the future of our National Health Service or which could undermine the government's ability to deliver on our manifesto commitment to the NHS. There are, however, benefits of trade for the NHS. We've talked to, this whole debate has been focused on fears and threats, but actually there are benefits to continue supporting public services like the NHS, which we all value and from which we all benefit. It is absolutely crucial that we have a strong economy. And now that we have left the EU, we find ourselves with a golden opportunity to strike free trade deals around the world, which will help fuel our economic recovery from COVID-19. So, Mr Stringer, in conclusion, the question is asked over and over again, but the answer is not going to change. The NHS is not on the table in any future trade deal. The price it pays for drugs is not on the table. The services it provides are not on the table. The government will not accept any trade deal that changes our ability to regulate the NHS or any public services, nor will we agree to any measures that would put NHS finances at risk or reduce clinician and patient choice. Scare stories otherwise simply do not fit with the facts. This government will always put patients and the sustainability of the NHS first. As an independent trading nation, the UK is reaching out to partners around the world that support our shared values of freedom and democracy and making great trade deals, starting with our friends in the United States, Australia, New Zealand and the deal with Japan that we've already delivered. It is by working together as a global community and embracing values-driven and value-generating trade with like-minded partners that we'll be able to beat this dreadful virus and build back a stronger economy to sustain our vital public services, not least our beloved National Health Service.
Martyn Day to wind up.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. May I, on behalf of the Petitions Committee, put on the record my gratitude to the members from all sides of the House who attended and took part in today's debate. If we've learned one thing from the debate and the petition, it is that there remains a degree of public uncertainty. And what the public are looking for is more than words. So I will say again, what we need is a cast iron guarantee protecting the NHS. It is not too much to ask. And if we are all in agreement, as appears to be the case from what has been said, that the NHS is not on the table, the public will be left wondering, why are we not putting that into law? Thank you.
The question is that the House has considered E-petition 307339 relating to trade deals and the NHS. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Thank you. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. If members can leave safely, socially distanced, and the sitting is suspended until 6 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you, Greg.
You frighten them into not saying anything, Greg.